Welcome to the asynchronous video for session 2 in clinical practice 2. Glad to have you here. I hope you have been having a good second week of the quad and that things are going well in your placement or continuing to go well in your internship. So this evening we're going to be working on finishing step 1 of cycle 2. So you have hopefully been working on template A and template B, which is getting to know your students, the demographics of your students. It's named differently in cycle 2 here. And then working on your learning segment, which is your 3 to 4 lessons. So hopefully that's going well. So let's get started. You should, in Canvas now, open up Canvas, and if you don't have access to this yet, you can gain access to it because you're going to be responding to some questions for credit for attendance. So if you will open up Canvas, go to module for session 2 for the asynchronous video, and there you will find the Pear Deck and the video for you. The link is here on the very first slide. When you log into the video, it should be there for you. So glad to have you. So let's get going. So tonight, what I'd like to be sure that you do for asynchronous learning, to be sure that you get the most out of this session that you can in preparation for submitting for the TPA for cycle 2, read and participate in every single slide. You need to take in that information. Your mind and your brain needs to take it in and needs to work with it and be active. So just try and do that the best you can. You're going to, at the end, I want you to be predicting what your next steps will be towards the TPA. So think about what you've learned this evening about parts C, D, E, and F that we're going to be going over, and what your next steps will be. And then you're going to mark those in your CP planner. And I'm going to actually use the CP planner this evening to kind of go over model some planning for you as to how you could get yourself organized, because this is a big cycle, as you have already probably noticed. On the slides, on each slide, there's going to be opportunities for feedback and to answer questions. So be sure that you, respond and place any of those things in there so that I can change and adjust my teaching as we go, and make sure I find ways to answer those questions either in class or during the Q&As on Friday. All right. So the first thing we're going to do is let's go over what you should have with you right now. Pause if you need to. That's the beauty of asynchronous learning, right? You can pause it whenever you need to go get these items. So number 1, gather your materials. So you need your assessment guide, you need your CP planner, and notebook, anything for notes, unless you want to write in the CP planner. The back side is blank. You can use that for your notes. Any writing tools, and then in your computer have a couple of different windows open. You're going to want Canvas open, the PowerPoint open, and then the link here is for the sign-in sheet. So for attendance sake, please sign in and let me know that you're here for attendance for this evening. Number 2. So find a place that's distraction-free as much as you can in working at home with the whole family or whoever happens to be there. So just try and do your best. Once again, the beauty of doing asynchronous videos is you can pause it anytime you need to if distractions come. So please do so as needed. All right, so number 3, now I want you to answer a question in the Pear Deck right now. What are you thinking about in relation to clinical practice this week? What are you thinking about the most? It can be good or bad, be question or clarification, whatever it is. So I'm going to pause right now for about 30 seconds, and I'm going to let you respond. Pause your video if that would be helpful as well. So go ahead and answer that question. All right, if you need more time, pause, but I'm going to go ahead and move on. So now let's also find out how you're doing stress-wise. So we've got the stressometer, I like to call it, here from a 0 to a 10, 0 being I'm in a good space and I can focus, I feel really good right now. All the way over to 10 in the red, I'm really struggling to manage my emotions and may struggle learning. And if that is you today, completely understand. Maybe now's not the right time to watch the video, because when we're stressed, we do not learn. That's something that research has found. So if you are stressed or anxious or, any of those things that's triggering your fight or flight, it's going to hinder you from learning. So why don't you just pause and come back when you're feeling a little better and you think you can take it in the content. So rate yourself right now between 0 and 10. I'll give you a moment to do so. Pause if you need to. All right, fantastic. Thank you for marking what number you are as of right now watching the video. This is very helpful for me to know our stress levels so I can adapt and adjust for class. Okay, thank you for doing that. And then on this particular slide, I want you to consider what we need to know. So tell me what you want to know still. What is something that you're like, I just don't get this? And this would be about step 1, because that's what we're going to be going over during this time. Or perhaps it has something to do with student teaching, which is fine. Anything related to clinical practice or your student teaching would be fine to ask. What do you already know? Tell me something here, number 2, that you are so excited that you understand and you get. Perhaps it's, I learned how to do pacing today better in my lesson planning, or I feel more confident with UDL lesson planning. Whatever it might be, mark that there for me. Give you about 30 seconds. Pause it, and we'll continue in just a moment. All right, so let's move forward then. Our agenda this evening is we just finished the wellness check, so I love to always check in with you to make sure I know how you're doing and how well you're going to be able to take in information for the evening. Secondly, then we're going to launch into step 1, the overview, and we're going to take a look at some exemplars from the CTC and 8th grade science example. And then we'll wrap it up with questions at the end. So, and in between there, actually, I'm going to give a few announcements as well, some supports for you. All right, so make sure you have your resources sitting there ready right next to you, your assessment guide, your CP planner, your writing tools, whatever it is you need, and your quiet space, and let's go. So last week, we reviewed the overall of step 1. So we've got part A, which is your contextual information about your students, where we decided, and I mentioned that you can use the same information from part A in cycle 1 if you have the same students. So you can use that demographic information, and it'll save you a little time. Shouldn't take you very long. If you are in a traditional setting and you are in a placement with a cooperating teacher, you may need to find out this information. Remember to be looking in the office and wherever other places and with your cooperating teacher to gather this information. All right, talk to them. And then the second was template B. We talked about the learning segment, and this is going to feel like a huge document because you're planning 3 to 4 lessons. So that's part of a unit, right? So you are going to be adding on to that each time you add a new lesson. So it's like a table, and so you just put the cursor at the end, hit enter, and it'll take, or tab actually, and it'll take you to the next row. Excuse me. All right, so then this evening, this is what we're going to cover this evening. We've got part C, template C, which is also a written narrative. You're going to be describing your assessments, and it can't be any more than 7 pages. So you're going to be describing each assessment, what your informal assessment is going to be, what your student self-assessment is going to be, and what your formal assessment is going to be. And then parts D, E, and F are the actual blank copies of those assessments and their rubrics. So when we look at the compass over here to the left, we've gone over part A. You have, put together your contextual information about your students, the whole class, and the lesson in general. And then you have, written your learning segment. That's what part B will be, including all of these particulars here. And then now we're going to be launching into part C, D, E, and F. That's the informal, the student self-assessment, and the formal. If you look down at the bottom, the rubrics, we have 2 rubrics in this step. The first rubric is to assess your lesson plan, your learning segment. And the second rubric is to assess your assessments. So that's what the second rubric is going to be doing. And then, of course, these questions down at the bottom here are directly from the rubric. So these are great questions to check yourself to ask and see if what you're doing meets the criteria for a 3, 4, or a 5. The score you need to get is a 21 out of 45. Sorry, I have something in my throat now. So that's what you're shooting for. You're shooting for a 3 or better, remembering that you can get one score of a 1, but not 2 times. You cannot get a 1 twice, and you won't pass no matter if all the others are 4s or 5s even. So you can only get 1 1. So keep that in mind. Here's our triangle for the higher order thinking skills. We want to be up at the top here. We don't want to be down in the lower order thinking skills, just like we did in cycle 1. All right, moving forward. So this is straight from the assessment guide. Go ahead and turn in your assessment guide to page 13. Page 13. If you are the single subject or world language, this happens to be from the multiple subject, you may be, it may be a little different in page numbers, but you need to go to step 1, go to part 3, assessment descriptions. Okay, so that's where you should be. All right, so directions. This is what you are required to do for this template. Your proposed learning segment provided a high-level description of your overall instruction and assessment sequence. So you've written your lesson plan, and it should have been very well developed and prepared. Your assessments and rubrics need to be clearly aligned with your learning goals. They want to see it's all aligned and that it makes sense as to whether you're assessing what actually you taught, which can actually be harder than you think. You think to yourself, well, duh, of course it's going to match my learning goals. But sometimes we have a tendency to assess on things that we haven't even taught. So just be very careful that you do that. Then you're going to provide a detailed description of your planned assessments in response to the following prompts. And those will be on the template, and we'll look at that next. If additional materials such as observation notes, exit slips need to be provided, you can add them to the end of the template file. You will provide a blank copy of each assessment of the informal, the student self-assessment, and the formal, and the corresponding rubric for each. If your informal, student self, and or formal assessments are not standalone documents, then you need to provide the questions you're going to ask and the rubric you plan to use. No more than 2 pages of description of the assessments and the rubrics, okay? So it doesn't have to be heavily in depth. So what I do want to say is that the one area that often you only have one rubric and sometimes no assessment with is the student self-assessment. So the students are assessing them. You need to make a rubric that is student-friendly in their own language, where they can decide on the content that you're teaching, whether they understand it or not. So broken down into different sections. And we're going to talk about rubrics next week. So just be sure that if you only have a rubric, that you also include with that, type it up at the top or the bottom of that same page, what you're going to ask the students to get to gather that information, to get them to respond on the rubric, okay? Or you can use an assessment with it. It's up to you. And then at the bottom, that green box, those are always those helpful tips of reminders of things we need to do, and they're just reminding you to label your submissions. So label it informal assessment, then label the next one informal rubric, right? You'll upload that into the informal, that's part D. Part E will be your student self-assessment with the rubric. Load that in. Then you'll submit part F, which is your formal assessment, and excuse me, your formal assessment and the rubric as well. All right, so let's move forward. All right, so here is template C. However, I'm realizing now, and I can't do anything about it as I've launched the Pear Deck already and the link. So this is the incorrect template. Okay, so I'm going to change that. By the time you open it, you'll be able to hopefully see the correct one. Please know this is the wrong template. Okay, I now have the correct template up, which is located in Canvas for you. So let's take a look at that template. and do this the right way with the correct template. Here we go. So you're describing your assessment. So first they're going to ask you about your informal assessment, and I have to apologize for my dogs playing with my son in the background. They're very loud, so hopefully you enjoy that. So the informal assessment, you're going to describe the informal assessment you plan to implement and the rubric. Explain how the selected informal assessment is aligned to the content-specific learning goals and how it's going to provide opportunities for students to demonstrate what they know. Identify what you're going to look for in student responses. So what are you looking for to be an exemplar response, okay, that a passing and well done response. Then same thing for the student self-assessment. Describe how you're going to engage students in self-assessment or reflection, and so on. And same thing with formal assessment. What learning goals are measured by the formal assessment? For example, content knowledge, skills, or abilities your students will demonstrate. And then what evidence are you planning to collect or observe from each student to determine that those learning goals in the rubric have been met? How will you use the rubric to define or identify successful evidence that students have achieved the learning goals? And how will you provide adaptations or accommodations as needed during the formal assessment to address individual student learning needs? Okay, so this is what you're going to be writing to describe the assessments. So when you're thinking of the assessments as well, you want to think about the informal assessment likely being at the very beginning lesson, the very first lesson, where you're checking quickly for understanding, or perhaps the second lesson to find out what they know, like an exit ticket or something that you do with them to find out if you're headed in the right direction. Am I teaching the information so they can understand and that they know what's going on and they can take in the content? So then when you move to the student self-assessment, that could likely be towards the middle or perhaps the second or third lesson. And you're going to assess what the students think they know, what they're taking in and what they understand. And then, of course, the formal assessment is going to be the very last session, the very last lesson, because you're giving the final assessment to find out what they learned in the whole unit. And then that data is going to be used in steps 3 and 4 to direct your teaching from there. Okay, so once again, this is the wrong template. Moving forward, here is the rubric for this particular template. It is assessing your assessments. So the essential question here is, how do you plan a learning segment in which your assessments and your strategies, instructional strategies and activities align and provide a progression of learning that develops students' concepts and skills to achieve the learning goals? So then, of course, we are looking and starting with 3. Did you meet the requirements for both of these for 3? If so, then moving up to 4, that's what scores will do. And if they think that you did 4, then they're going to move you up to 5, and then you'll either get a 5 or you'll stay at a 4. Same thing will happen with moving down. If you did not meet the requirements for 3, you'll move down to a 2. If you didn't meet the requirements for 2, you'll move down to a 1. Okay? So you're going to be looking at this during this class session, so just be ready to have your rubrics ready to go. To be using along with the exemplar that we're going to take a look at next. So this is the CTC example. It's an 8th grade science lesson. We have it available in Canvas, and I'd highly recommend that you pause right now to go to Canvas and open it up. You scroll down to the bottom. The exemplars are down towards the bottom. And in case this is too blurry for you, unfortunately, I can't have high def sometimes when I make copies of these and make them into JPEGs, excuse me. But you can see right here what the student has written. You've got the informal assessment, and he's saying that I've designed a 2x2 vocabulary grid with the following words divided into each box. So he's got academic vocabulary. And then he talks about his worksheet, that it contains instructions promoting students to fill in each box with things that they know about the different processes listed, and so on. Okay, so informal assessment, there's 2 questions there, 2 prompts for informal assessment. Then we've got student self-assessment here. There's only 1 prompt for the student self-assessment. And I've watched his videos, and so you're going to get a chance to do that as well. And you'll see him actually doing that with a group, and it's really fun and interesting to see that, and gives you some ideas as well, I know. Then here is the formal assessment, and there are more questions in this. There's 4, 5, and 6. And so it's going to ask you these questions here, and you're just going to respond related to your formal assessment. So please go into Canvas and open this up and take a look. You're going to need it for the activity this evening. You're going to need this as well as the rubric. So perhaps you could have one window open for Canvas and one window open for your PowerPoint, where you have the rubric on the PowerPoint and the exemplar in Canvas open. Okay. I just wanted to include and make sure you've seen, some of you may not have gotten any scores back yet on TPA1, but this here is what your score report is going to look like. It'll be emailed to you, and this person passed. This is cycle 1, a cycle 1 example. So you can see they have it organized by rubric. So step 1, plan, this is cycle 1, 1.1, 1.2, 3, and 4. Okay, in this particular step for cycle 2, there's only 2 rubrics, so it would look a little different, but this is how the score report looks, and I wanted to make sure and let you see what it looks like. And this is a passing score of 26. All right, so this is your first activity. You're going to need to pause the video once I'm done explaining, and you're going to take about 15 minutes to look at the exemplar and look at the rubrics, and then answer these questions. After looking at your rubrics, what do you think the candidate did well in template A, and what score would you give? All right, so this is your activity. This is what you're going to do, having your rubric open and your Canvas open with the exemplar there for you. So you're going to, after looking at both rubrics, what do you think the candidate did well in template C and the assessment examples and the rubrics, and what score would you give? And after looking at the rubrics, what could the candidate improve according to that score that you gave? So template C and parts D, E, and F, what would you give? And kind of give some summary of why. So it doesn't have to be a big long written answer, but just kind of bullet points or something. This is why I gave them a 3. This is why I think they did this well, or they didn't do this well on each of those. So you're going to take about 15 minutes to do this. So what I want you to do is get yourself comfortable, get your window open for your exemplar and another for your rubric. And when you're ready, pause the video and take that time and type in your responses, and then come back when you're ready. All right, welcome back. Hopefully you got some good ideas about what was good in that response and what wasn't, because we know it's a passing score of 3 or above, but we don't know which it is, whether it's a 3, a 4, or a 5. So I'm looking forward to finding your answers and seeing what you thought about this exemplar. Also in Canvas are the other exemplars from students. This particular example from the CTC is a student, a candidate, and I believe it was 2018, so it's pre-pandemic. So I have collected samples of students here at Point Loma who passed during the pandemic. So those will be also very, very helpful for you, and I would highly recommend you take a look at those. All right, so let's move forward to D, E, and F. So we just went over C, and now we're going to take a look at D, E, and F, which that's the blank copy of your informal, the blank copy, and the rubric, excuse me, the blank copy of the informal and the rubric, the blank copy of the student self-assessment and the rubric, and then the blank copy of the formal assessment and the rubric, D, E, and F. Okay, part D, E, and F. This is due January 24th as well, and this is located in your assessment guide, page 14 and 15. And I also then want to draw your attention to your CP planner, and let's take a look at rubrics. We're going to do a quick review, a quick overview of the rubrics. Okay, there is an infographic in here on page 19 that I have designed for you that will be very helpful. I want you to take a very good look at this and make sure you understand it. because this is what they're expecting. I put this together directly from what they trained us to do and to look for when I trained to be a scorer for Cycle 2. So this is the rubric, an example. On the left side here, they consider it the criterion or possibly the learning goals. Okay. Across the top are the performance levels. And in the middle here are the indicators. This is what indicates what performance level they are on which criterion. Okay. And it's going to give you a rubric construction step. So first you're going to determine the learning goals that you're going to use for your learning lesson, and those will be established in your lesson plan. So you're going to write those in your learning segment. Those criterion then would go on the left. And you're going to list all the learning goals that must be present in the student's work to ensure that it's high in quality. Then second, you're going to identify the difference between what good work is and weaker work. So you're going to use, 3 to 5 levels. This one happens to have 3, 1, 2, and 3, but you're also going to put a description underneath it. And I've got an example down here of performance level examples. It could be 1 is a beginning, 2 fundamental, 3 practicing, 4 inspiring, and so on. There's some other examples here. And you don't want to give titles that will make them feel horrible, obviously, right? Met, not yet met, on their way, whatever it is that you want to use. So just be very sure that you're careful with that. Then 3, describe the procedures used for making judgments, or assigning those scores. So what are those descriptors going to be? So you're going to write clear descriptions of the types of work that will be assigned to each category or level of achievement. The descriptions are going to help the user, to be able to use the rubric consistently over time, which increases the reliability and the fairness of the evaluation. Okay. The benefits of using a rubric, there are so many. If you've never used a rubric before, they are exceptionally supportive and helpful in giving feedback and also helping students know what's expected of them. And they know clearly what you expect, and then you can assess them very quickly and easily, and then also give them feedback. Here up at the top, let me zoom in the top left here as an example of one. So we've got criterion on the left, number of sources, historical accuracy. So this is probably a writing history, history research paper here. So the criterion on the left is the number of resources they had, the historical accuracy of the paper, the organization, and the bibliography. And then the descriptors here of how to get an excellent, a good, or a poor. So they need 10 to 12 sources to get a 3. They need few inaccuracies to get a 2 here for historical accuracy. If we go down to the bibliography, in order to get excellent, they need to have all the relevant bibliographic information included. Okay, so you've got your criterion, you've got your performance level across the top, what score they would get, and then you've got your indicators and your descriptors here in the middle, in the meat of the rubric. Okay, so please, please, please use this as you're going into working on this assignment. And next week, I'm actually going to be providing a Texas University link that will give you some samples to use as well. Okay. All right, so let's get into each of these individually and take a look at the assessment guide. So in the assessment guide, the informal assessment here for Part D, they say that you need to describe one informal assessment that you plan to implement and the corresponding rubric, explain how the selected informal assessment is aligned, and how the assessment will provide students opportunities to demonstrate content knowledge. This is a lot of the same information, right, from the template, but it's telling you what is the informal assessment that you're going to need to describe. So this is also very helpful here. Whoops, let me go back. So these are the prompts as you saw in the template. 2 is identify what will you look for in their responses to score them. But this green box down at the bottom, these are always very important and very helpful. They're telling you to be specific. Informal assessment should be developmentally appropriate. So you're not going to give a writing exit ticket to a kindergartner, of course, but they just want to remind you of that. So if the informal assessment involves questioning, list the questions you plan to ask. Don't assume they're going to know, because they're not going to. If the informal assessment is a running record, describe how you plan to document student reading ability. If your students are working collaboratively in groups, provide the set of instructions or expectations for learning. If the students engage in peer assessment, provide guiding questions. If you're observing student work, provide the observation guide. So those gives you a little bit of background of what they're looking for. So the informal assessment and the rubric. Okay, then part E is the student self-assessment. And this is the same as you saw in the template. So 3, describe how you're going to engage students in self-assessment or reflection. They're asking you to explain how the self-assessment rubric is aligned to the content-specific and, if appropriate, ELD learning goals, and how it will provide opportunities for students to reflect. There's the key word. Will they be able to reflect on their learning and understanding of the content? If you provide instructional adaptations or accommodations for the specific student that you're using, especially in the video, explain why. All right, and here's our big takeaway. We need to be sure and remember, again, it's telling us to be specific and that it needs to be developmentally appropriate. Young students may need to respond verbally or have picture cues if they are not yet reading and writing. So your rubric is going to need to be pictures, happy face, smiley face, whatever it is that will be helpful for them to understand what it is that they are selecting and choosing. If the student self-assessment is a set of questions or pictures, list the questions you plan to have the student respond to or provide the pictures. If it's a presentation of learning, describe the guiding questions or expectation for performance. If you want students to draw or write a reflection of what they've learned, provide the sentence frames or the prompts for that activity. Remember that students will use a rubric to self-assess their product, process, or performance. So this rubric is the only student-friendly rubric you're going to use. The other 2 are being used by you, the teacher. This student self-assessment rubric is being used by students, so it needs to be developmentally appropriate. Okay? All right, the formal assessment in your last lesson. So here are the prompts, the 4, 5, 6, and 7 that we see in the assessment guide. And the tip that they're giving us again is to be specific, that it needs to be developmentally appropriate, and that you need to describe what each student is going to do and the resulting process, product, or performance. The example they give is that each student, for example, will use manipulatives to work through a mathematical process problem with verbal rationale. Or they're going to draw or paint a picture. They're going to balance on one foot or throw and catch a ball. They're going to participate in a hands-on science experiment. They're going to tell a story using puppets, retell a story to follow in order of events, and so on. Okay, so you're going to collect and submit student products or written summaries as they move through a process, video recording student performances, if you do use student performances. Okay, those are a lot of great examples. Some of those are great. All right, so here is the example of Part D, the CTC 8th grade science candidates example of the informal copy and the rubric. So here we have the informal assessment, claiming evidence, reasoning, practice. Okay, so we will have looked at and know what the learning segment is going to be about in science here. And we've looked at the rationale as to why and their explanation of the assessments. So now we're looking at their submission here for Part D. So this is what they're going to give their students at the beginning, close to the beginning of the segment, the unit, excuse me. And then here is the rubric that collaborates and works with this. So he's going to gather this data, this information, and he's going to quickly assess it using this rubric and give them a score. Okay, so they'll either be exemplary, good, on track, or needs work. This follows the same rubric protocol that I showed you in that slide previously. All right, then this is the candidate's example of the student self-assessment. Notice here they only have a rubric. So what I would be interested in is if they included in the assessment descriptions also a description of what they will be saying here to give this, self-assessment to students. What are the prompts they're going to give them? What are they going to say to ask, them to fill this out? So I would probably include a little blurb either at the top or the bottom of this. This is what information I will be giving students to, begin this assessment. All right, part F is formal assessment. So this is the student's example of the formal assessment. So he's got background information, context. So he's doing an anaerobic respirational exercise physiology lab performance task. That's a mouthful. So he's giving background information and context. Then he's telling students that this is the performance task you need to complete. Then this is when it's due. Here are other requirements, and here are accommodations that can be made for you if need be. Great example here of all the portions. You notice the accommodations are listed here as part of it because he's wanting to make sure he gets on the higher level of the rubric there, because it requires what you're going to do for accommodations, right? So that's brilliant. That's a really good idea. All right, this is his matching rubric to go with it. So here was his assessment for the formal assessment, and here is his rubric. It's just a little long. So he had exemplary, good, on track, needs work. Those are really nice performance levels. They're not going to hurt a student's, feelings too desperately if they don't understand. So that's great. And then on the left, his learning segment, his learning goals over here is that he wants them to be able to have a good layout and organization of his lab, that they gather background information, presentation of data, and then a conclusion that needs to be included in that as well. Okay, so that's the examples of part D, E, and F. So here is the assessment rubric that goes with that you're going to be assessed on your assessments. How does the candidate plan a learning segment in which assessments, instructional strategies, and learning activities align and provide a progression of learning that develops students' concepts and skills to achieve the learning goals? So if you notice, for step 1, this covers part C, because we saw this in the first activity with part C, and this also covers part D, E, and F. So you're going to be assessed with rubric 2.2 on part C through F. And now you're going to do the same activity that you did previously. So after looking at the rubrics, what do you think the candidate did well on their informal student self-assessment and formal? What went well? And what score would you give it? And what areas do you think you could improve? And why? Tell me a little bit about that. So you're going to take, again, about 15 minutes having one window open for the exemplar from Canvas, and another window open for the PowerPoint here, the Pear Deck, and the slide with the rubric on it. And you're going to give some feedback here. It doesn't have to be an essay, once again, as I said, just a quick summary of what you thought. So go ahead and pause when you're ready and begin giving your responses. All right, good job. Now that you have looked at the assessment guide, you've looked at the compass map, the assessment guide, you've looked at the templates, and you've looked at an exemplar, and you've analyzed an exemplar. Having done those things for part C, D, E, and F, I want you to kind of rate how you're feeling about this. This is just about C, D, E, and F, not everything else going on, your student teaching or your placement or anything like that. Or what you had for dinner, whether you feel good about that or not. I want you to choose which smiley face you are, which emoticon here. So you're either, I got this, green, I'm good, or all the way down to, I have no idea what I just read in the red. And then the two in the middle, you've got your orange and your dark orange. So tell me right now, take about, 15 seconds here. I'll pause for you to circle which one you feel like you are. All right, now I would like you to respond and reflect on today, what you just did in your video before we move on to some announcements and questions. What did you understand for sure? What do you feel like, okay, I totally understand that. Sorry, let me move the window up. I just realized my captions are not completely seen in the video. That's not good. So type up what you think you understand, and then something you need more clarification about. If there's many things, type those in. Just one is sufficient, so I can kind of get an idea of the areas that we're still needing to go over. Like I said, we'll be heading into rubrics again next week in more depth, along with our step 2. All right, so some updates here. As we shift into wrapping up, I want to just remind you about the Pabulum app. I told you about that last quad. That is still available for you with everything at your fingertips in the app, available for you, and ways to communicate and share ideas with people and gather your resources on your phone. And then now what we're going to do is we're going to shift to filling in your planner. I just can't reiterate enough how important it is for you to organize yourself and to use a calendar to write everything down, because your brain cannot take everything in right now. You've got so much going on in your head. And so you really need to organize yourself and get yourself set with the planner. So what I want to do is show you an example, kind of model ways you can use it. So if you would take your planner now, and I'm going to put it on the screen for you. I'm going to kind of write as we go, just give you an example of what I've done. I've done an example as if I were a candidate, what I would do. Okay, so I have, sorry, that's going to be loud there for a moment. I have written in my dates for January. So what I'm going to do first is go in and put all my dates in, okay? Label the calendar, label the individual days so that it's easy for me to mark things. I've also marked in here what week it is for each of them. And what I would do, what I did in, let's see, CP1 for them is I actually wrote down when all the assignments are due, okay? So you can kind of get a visual and a big picture of when things are due so that you can plan your lessons. You have an even harder time than Cycle 1, as you can tell already, because in Cycle 1 you only had one lesson, right? Now you have 3, 4, and possibly 5. And we'll cover that at the end in step 4. So that's going to be important. Write everything down. Here is a page for you to write down all of the things that you see you might need to do. An example would be, oh, that's really loud, I apologize. Example would be all these things here. I'm writing down dates. I'm writing down things that I need to be sure and do. I need to research to be sure that I, am ready to go. And I've got my calendar. And then I'm going to launch into my weekly schedule. And here's where I'm going to be able to keep track of all my daily lesson plans, what I'm teaching, when I have class, when I have classwork due, parts of the TPA, and when I'm going to be observed. All of those things are important for you to lay out how you're going to record 3 to 5 lessons, right, during this quad, and get it all done before the peer review so I can work with my partner to use that time most effectively. Because our goal is to pass, and you've really got to, make sure you're organized and focused on that. So I'm just showing an example of if I was teaching 6th grade math, we're going to pretend like I'm teaching 6th grade math, and it's Go Math. I have taught that. And perhaps, this day we're doing lesson 6.3, then we go to 4, 5, 6, we do a review. So I'm writing it down as I know and as I plan with my cooperating teacher or as I plan with my grade level. So that I know what I'm doing, I lay it all out, so then I can plan what I'm teaching, and then I know what to write my learning segment about, because otherwise I have no idea what I'm teaching, I have no idea when to schedule it. So it's the same idea of backwards planning, so you need to really make sure that you do that. So here is my second week, okay, week 2. I've written down what I'm doing. I have the asynchronous class today. I wrote down that I had a professional development from 4 to 5, and that I have an observation tomorrow. So today I need to be submitting my UDL 24 hours in advance. Then I have my observation tomorrow. I have the Unit 7 preview in class. It's a project day. Then I wrote down I have staff meeting from 4 to 5. I'm just adding all this in so that I can really see the big picture when I go to plan and plan my learning segment. And then this Sunday, I know I have through C, D, E, and F due, the rough draft version that can be improved as we move into rubrics a bit more next week. And I'm just going to keep adding as I go so that when I go back in and I can set my schedule for recording, like for example here I say, okay, I know that this week I'm going to be teaching lesson 7, and I can record my TPA video here, but I've got to decide where's my first lesson, my second lesson, and third lesson, and fourth lesson if I'm going to do 4. You can do 3 or 4 for this initial portion. So perhaps I'm going to videotape this day, this day, and this day, because I have 4 lessons. Oh, that's perfect. I can do that. If I want to go into recording next week and combine an observation, which I could do, then I need to include, like say perhaps I move on to lesson 8.1. Well, I was doing lesson 7, right? So now I've moved on to another lesson, and that's a completely different unit on a different learning content and standards. So that might not work. So, and of course, always use pencil in here so that you can really be sure and erase as you go, because you're going to be changing things. So then this will just help you as you go through to be able to plan and know when you're submitting to Pearson and everything else that's going on so that you can backwards plan. So lay everything out on the calendar, then look back and say, okay, I have to do my final observation this week, I have to do this week, I can record here, and so on. Okay, so that's just to kind of give you a quick overview of how you can use it. You may have a different way that's more effective for you, but scheduling and organizing is going to be critical. This is the calendar in Canvas, so I used this to map it out and lay it all into my planner. It's going to be a little annoying the very first time you do it. You're going to feel like you're spending too much time on something, but I promise you it will help you throughout. I've used this for many students, and it has been extremely effective in laying things out and making sure you get to everything you need to. Okay? All right, moving on to the next slide. This is just a reminder about your SIBME annotations. All right? When you record, if you do, you are going to be doing annotations. If your supervisor comes in live, you're going to be using these documents, okay? So if you have your supervisor come in live, they are going to be, while they're there, filling out a formal evaluation, a formative assessment, and this is what it looks like, okay? And then if they came in live in person, after they filled out this formative assessment, you would complete an analysis and reflection. And these are the questions you would answer. Here's the analysis. Here's the reflection. Okay. Now, in order to meet these requirements for annotations, we have divided this up into 3 steps for annotations. So as a reminder, the first step is you. Here are the analysis questions that could guide you to support you through providing those answers. Okay. Did you teach the lesson as planned? If not, what changes do you plan to make and why? So perhaps at minute 3 and 11, you had to make an adjustment because your the student that you planned something for is not there, so you have to adjust on the fly. 2, how appropriate were your time allocations for your lesson? So perhaps at minute 10:23, you realized you were going too fast because every single student's hand was up, and you thought, oh my goodness, I need to adjust my time and not go so quickly. And so on. Okay, so you're going to take a look at these. That's step 1. Then step 2, as a reminder, your supervisor is then going to complete the annotations as their evaluation. Then when they're done, they'll tell you in step 3, here are reflections to guide you in how you could respond. So reflecting on your lesson, giving your analysis, number 1 is giving your analysis of this lesson and the student learning that resulted. How will you use this information to guide your planning for future results? So at the end, or as a response to your supervisor, you would respond where it is most appropriate in the video to answer this question, and same thing for 2 and 3. These are just ways to guide. Your supervisor may not give you these, but this would be very helpful to get the best out of the annotations and learn the most from the experience, and still keep the process moving forward as to what we would do, aligned with what we would do in real time in person. All right, so next week we are going to be heading into step 2, which is part G, E, and F, which is the teaching and the recording and the annotations, the video clips of your lesson. Okay, so step 1 was huge. We need to wrap that up before we can even teach, so that's what you need to be finishing up by this Sunday. And before you come to class next week, be sure you've read the weekly overview. That overview is going to be incredibly helpful to front load the knowledge you need before you get to class, so that it's not the first time you've heard it. And that's going to be excellent for long-term memory. Our next class then is next Wednesday, January 29th from 4:30 to 6. And here's a little checklist that you can kind of go through to make sure you're following, meeting these requirements to keep yourself up to speed. You're going to complete templates A and B. They're going to be due on Sunday. Also included with that is template C and the assessments, okay? What unit are you going to teach? You should really be wrapping that up by now. That should be something that you are formalizing and you know what you're going to do. Make sure you've read the Cycle 2 Assessment Guide. Look at it again. Read Step 1 several times if you think it's going to be helpful for you, which I highly would recommend. Do you have your observation date set? And by now you should have at least 7 daily lesson plans. We had Monday off, so you have 5 from last week, 2 from this week. So get those in your digital binder. And then finally, be sure that you have looked at your week 3 timeline as an intern or a traditional student. And that is in your digital binder, and that'll kind of guide you on what you should be doing during this week to keep you on track for your student teaching. All right. Okay, now to wrap up before questions, I would love it if you would just put a little kudos for someone in your class that's helped you or that has encouraged you or, just gave you the information you needed and it just makes you feel great and helped relieve some anxiety. Whatever it might be, we all need to have a little encouragement. So please type in there, like, for example, thank you to Josie for asking me how I was doing. I appreciate it. Whatever it might be, put a little kudos in there for someone and let's share those and others will see them. And to finish this evening, now is our question time that I would normally take in person verbally, but what I want you to do is to write your questions. Those will obviously come to me and I'll be able to give you some responses to help you through that. And then all those questions or more that you will have as you start working on each of these, please come to the Friday Q&A. Really encourage you to do so. I would recommend, if you can, to come to every single one. I have people who just come just to sit and listen, and it helps them know what to expect. So please come and get your questions answered. And then get working on A, B, C, D, E, and F that are all due on Sunday. Okay? And let me know if you have questions and concerns, and I'd be happy to help you or work with you in any way that I can. Blessings to you, and I will see you next week.